Have you ever stood in a room filled with things you once loved and suddenly felt a strange heaviness in your chest? Not sadness, not regret, just weight. It's a feeling many people experience as they prepare for retirement. You look around and realize your life has become full, but not necessarily in a freeing way. It's full of things, memories, responsibilities, and for the first time, you begin to wonder, do I really want to carry all of this into the next chapter? This isn't about judgment, it's about awareness. You see, there's a quiet truth hidden beneath the surface of letting go, something that Buddhist philosophy speaks of often. Attachment, in its softest form, is simply holding on to what once mattered. But as the Buddha gently reminded us, all things are impermanent, everything changes, and so must we. There's a line I once heard that stayed with me: in the forest of life, the wise traveler doesn't carry dead branches into spring, and perhaps retirement is just that, a springtime for the soul, a moment to pause, to breathe, and to ask, what do I really want to take with me, and what can I finally set down? Today we're not just talking about selling things, we're talking about freedom, about space, about lightening the load so you can walk more peacefully through the years ahead. Let's explore 5 things that many have chosen to sell before retirement, not just to declutter their homes, but to liberate their hearts. Part 1. The house that became a temple of burden. There's a certain silence that lives in big, empty houses, not the comforting kind of silence, like the stillness before dawn or the hush of snowfall. No, this silence echoes. It bounces off the walls of unused rooms, ricochets down hallways that haven't heard footsteps in years, and hums quietly behind closed doors that no longer open for anyone. You may know this silence. Maybe you've walked into your living room and paused, not because something felt off, but because nothing at all felt present. The photographs are there, the books, the furniture, the guest bedroom still made up as if someone might visit tomorrow. But deep inside, you sense something has shifted. The life that once pulsed through the space now flickers, like the last embers in a hearth. Let me tell you a story. There was once an elderly monk named Tenzin who had lived for decades in a large monastery nestled in the Himalayan foothills. The monastery was grand, built by generations before him, its tall columns carved with stories of the Buddha's past lives, its prayer wheels large enough to echo like thunder when turned. Tenzin spent most of his life tending to its gardens, guiding young monks, and maintaining sacred rituals passed down through centuries. It was, by all accounts, a holy place. But when he reached his 70th year, something inside him stirred. One morning, he walked slowly down the corridor of the monastery, stopping before the great hall. He looked up at the sweeping roof, the dust gathering in corners, the ever-growing list of repairs, responsibilities, and routines. And with great reverence, not disdain, he whispered to himself, "This temple has become a shrine to my past, not a path to my future." Weeks later, to the quiet shock of many, Tenzin left. He took only a single bag, a worn robe, and a wooden bowl. He walked deep into the forest and found a small, abandoned hermit's hut. It leaked a little. The walls were crooked. But there, in that humble place, he found a space light enough to carry him into his final years. When asked why he gave up so much, he simply said, "Peace does not need pillars to stand." Now you may not live in a monastery, but perhaps your home, once filled with family, laughter, and the mess of life, has started to feel more like a museum than a dwelling. You might love it dearly. You might still remember the sound of children running up the stairs, or the smell of holiday meals from the kitchen. And yet, you might also sense that the home has grown larger than your life now needs. It's a difficult thing to admit. For many, the house is not just 4 walls and a roof. It's memory made physical. Selling it can feel like betrayal. Downsizing can feel like erasing something sacred. And yet, what if it's not erasure, but transformation? What if, like Tenzin, you're not walking away from your life, but creating space for a new kind of living? In Buddhist philosophy, this letting go is not abandonment, it is wisdom. The Buddha taught, just as a snake sheds its old skin, so must we release what we've outgrown. The question is not whether your house is beautiful or filled with love. It's whether it still nourishes the person you are now, not just the person you used to be. So pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is your home carrying you, or are you carrying it? Does it offer you comfort, or does it quietly ask for care you no longer have the energy to give? I once spoke with a woman, Eleanor, in her late 60s, who had raised 3 children in a stately 2-story colonial house just outside Philadelphia. Her husband had passed. The children had flown across the country, raising families of their own. She found herself tending gardens that no longer brought her joy, climbing stairs with growing caution, and dusting shelves lined with mementos she hadn't touched in years. One day, she said she sat at the edge of her bed, looked around her bedroom, the room she had once designed down to every fabric swatch, and realized, I'm living in a memory, not a home. 6 months later, she moved into a cozy cottage near a small lake. Just 2 rooms, a reading nook, no staircase. And as she told me, with tears in her eyes, not of grief, but release, I thought I'd missed the space. But what I actually gained was space to breathe. So no, this isn't about selling your house for the sake of it. It's not about chasing minimalism or making cold calculations. It's about choosing a space that matches the rhythm of your soul now. A space that allows you to walk freely, gently, and fully awake. And when you let go of a house that no longer fits, what else might become possible? What might you now have time for? People, passions, peace. This is the beginning of letting go with intention, but the home is just one piece of that story. As we move forward, let's turn our attention to another possession that often goes unquestioned in retirement, the second or third vehicle sitting quietly in the driveway. Part 2. The extra car and the illusion of mobility. Not long ago, I sat with an old friend named Charles over a quiet cup of tea in his sun-drenched kitchen. At 72, Charles had retired from a long, fruitful career as an engineer. His children had long moved out, and his days were now slower, filled with gardening, morning walks, and the occasional road trip with his wife. As we talked, I glanced out the window and noticed 3 cars parked in his driveway, 2 sedans and an old pickup truck that hadn't moved in weeks. Still holding on to all 3, I asked gently. He chuckled. Well, you never know when you might need one. I paused and smiled. When was the last time you drove the truck? He looked out the window and let the silence answer for him. This moment reminds me of an old Buddhist tale, told in many variations, about a man who carried a raft across the land. He had once used it to cross a dangerous river, and it had saved his life. But now, far beyond the river's reach, he still insisted on dragging it behind him, convinced that one day he might need it again. The Buddha's lesson was simple. A raft is useful for crossing the water, but once across, it should be left behind. Carrying it further becomes a burden, not a blessing. That's what the second or third car often becomes in retirement. It once represented freedom, a way to work, to run errands, to take the kids to soccer games, to be everywhere, do everything, all at once. But in this season of life, when schedules loosen and the need to be everywhere fades, we often find that one vehicle is more than enough. And yet, we hold on. Why? perhaps out of habit, or fear of losing independence, or because, like Charles, we whisper to ourselves, "You never know." But let me ask you this: what kind of freedom is it if the thing you hold on to quietly costs you more than it gives? Each car comes with insurance, maintenance, registration, and the slow drip of responsibility. And while none of that feels heavy when you're in your 40s and working full-time, in retirement, those expenses can quietly erode peace of mind. It's not just about money, it's about energy, attention, and the subtle emotional weight of keeping up with things you no longer use. I once met a retired couple in Oregon, Helen and Mark, who had downsized their vehicles after 40 years of living with 2 cars. Helen told me, "At first, I felt like I was giving up control, but within a month, it was like we'd stepped out of some invisible fog. Less to think about, fewer bills, and we actually started driving together again, talking more, enjoying the ride." And that's the hidden gift. By letting go of the extra vehicle, you don't just lighten the garage, you open up space for connection, for intention, for presence. In Buddhist teachings, there's a concept called santosha, contentment with what is. It's not resignation, it's not settling, it's the quiet, knowing that what you have is enough, that your needs are met, that freedom doesn't come from having more options, but from needing fewer. So I invite you to consider, is that extra car still serving you, or are you serving it? And if your days no longer demand that kind of mobility, maybe, just maybe, you can release it, not with regret, but with gratitude. Thank it for its service, and then let it go, like the man who finally left the raft by the riverside and walked on lighter, freer, and more at peace. And this reflection on simplifying what we drive naturally leads us into a deeper layer of what we carry. Not just physical items, but the tangled complexity of our finances, investment portfolios, policies, plans we no longer fully understand. So in the next part of our journey, let's explore how simplifying your money can bring clarity, not just to your bank account, but to your mind. Part 3. Complex investments. Complicated mind. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from hard labor or lack of sleep. It comes from complexity, the kind that sits quietly in the background of your life, tugging at your attention like a loose thread. And nowhere is that more common, especially in retirement, than in the tangled web of financial accounts, policies, and investments collected over a lifetime. You may have felt it. Maybe you've opened a drawer and found old insurance papers you haven't looked at in years. Or perhaps you've received another quarterly statement from an investment fund you barely remember signing up for. There's a sinking feeling that grows, not because you lack money, but because you no longer feel in control of it. It reminds me of a story often shared among monks in Thailand about a man who went into the forest searching for treasure. After days of wandering, he stumbled upon an enormous tree whose branches shimmered with strange golden fruit. Delighted, he filled his sack with as much as he could carry, but the fruit was heavy, and the farther he walked, the more he struggled. The bag pulled on his back, his breath shortened, yet he clung to it, determined not to lose what he believed had value. Eventually, exhausted, he collapsed by a stream. An old monk found him and asked why he carried so much. When the man showed him the golden fruit, the monk smiled gently and said, "This is not fruit. These are stones, painted by the forest light. You have carried weight, not wealth." The man wept, not because he had been deceived, but because he had burdened himself without knowing it. In the same way, many of us carry financial instruments that once seemed like treasures, whole life insurance policies from decades ago, Variable annuities we didn't fully understand but trusted someone to manage. Mutual funds with layers of hidden fees, private equity deals that send confusing tax forms every year. At one time, they may have had a place, but today, are they still serving you, or are they simply painted stones? I once met a client, David, a retired pharmacist in his early 70s, who came to me with 13 different accounts spread across 5 institutions. He was sharp, but even he admitted, "I don't know what half of these are doing anymore." When we sat down together, we found duplication, high fees, and overlapping strategies that were working against one another. He had invested with good intentions, but over the years the picture had become so complicated that he no longer felt peaceful when he thought about his money. After a few months, David chose to consolidate. He sold off the overly complex pieces and moved into a simple, low-cost index strategy he could understand. When I asked how he felt about it, he didn't talk about returns or numbers. He said, "I feel like my mind has room again." In Buddhism, simplicity is more than just a lifestyle, it's a form of wisdom. The Zen tradition especially teaches that the simplest path is often the most profound, not because it lacks depth, but because it removes what distracts us from truth. As the Buddha taught, just as rain pierces a poorly thatched roof, craving pierces the distracted mind. When your financial life is cluttered with overlapping accounts, opaque investments, or high-fee products, your mind bears the cost, not just in dollars, but in clarity. And in retirement, this precious time where you finally have space to rest, reflect, and be, it's worth asking, is this complexity necessary, or am I holding on to it out of fear? Fear is often the root. Fear of missing out, fear of change, fear of making the wrong move. But what if peace, real, spacious, sustainable peace, lives on the other side of simplicity? And it's not just about investments. It's also about accounts scattered across institutions, inherited 401ks you forgot about, small pensions, old savings bonds, or multiple IRAs opened for different reasons. All of it adds layers, each one a decision, a password, a responsibility. Letting go doesn't mean being reckless. It means asking with intention, do I truly need this anymore? Does it serve me, or is it quietly consuming my energy? When you simplify your financial life, you create not just order, but breathing space. And when the mind can breathe, it can rest. And when it rests, it awakens to what truly matters. So if the house was the space you lived in, and the car the way you moved, then your financial plan is the map you follow. And like any good map, it should be easy to read, flexible to adjust, and free of unnecessary detours. And that brings us to the next area of our lives, where we often accumulate without noticing, what I like to call the garage of forgotten joy. In the next part, we'll take a closer look at the RVs, jet skis, motorcycles, and forgotten hobbies that once brought pleasure, but now sit still, gathering dust, quietly whispering for release. Part 4. The toys we cling to long after joy has left. It's a quiet Sunday morning. You walk out into the garage, not with purpose, but maybe just to grab something from the shelf, and your eyes catch it. The RV you haven't taken on a trip in 5 years. The motorcycle you used to love. The jet ski that hasn't touched water since your grandson was in middle school. It's all still there, silent, still, and covered in a fine layer of dust, like memories slowly fading into the corners of time. At first you think, maybe next summer. But if you're being honest, you've whispered that same line every year since 2018. There's no shame in it. Life changes, bodies change, priorities shift, and sometimes the very things that once symbolized freedom, adventure, energy, movement, now stand still, serving not as vessels for joy, but reminders of a past that no longer fits the present. It reminds me of a short parable from the Zen tradition. There was once a man who lived by a river and had built a small boat with his own hands. It was a thing of beauty, strong, sleek, reliable. He had taken it fishing, used it to ferry neighbors, even watched sunsets from its deck. It had brought him much happiness. But as the seasons passed and his legs grew weaker, he found himself going to the river less and less. Still, he kept the boat tied to the dock, patching its wood and repainting it every spring. One day, a young monk passed by and saw the old man laboring over the boat. "You don't use it anymore," the monk observed gently. "Why not give it to someone who will?" The old man looked at the boat, paused and smiled. "Because it reminds me of who I used to be," the monk nodded. "And who you are now, doesn't he deserve something lighter?" That story has stayed with me because I've met many people, good people, who like that man hold on to their boats. And not just the physical ones. RVs, ATVs, boats, timeshares, expensive hobby equipment. All of it. Sometimes it's out of nostalgia. Sometimes guilt. Sometimes the belief that letting go means giving up. But here's the question Buddhism often brings us back to: is what you're holding still bringing you joy, or simply anchoring you to an identity you no longer live in? I once had a conversation with a woman named Sandra, a retired teacher in Arizona. She and her husband had bought a bright red convertible in their early 60s as a sort of retirement celebration. They called it their freedom car. They took weekend drives, visited the Grand Canyon, and felt, her words, not mine, young again. But after her husband passed, the car sat untouched. For 2 years it remained in the garage, covered, cared for, but never started. When I asked her why she kept it, she said, "Because letting go of it feels like letting go of him." I was quiet for a while. Then I gently asked, "And what would it mean to release the car, but keep the memory?" She did eventually sell it to a young couple starting their own journey. And she told me later, "I thought I'd feel emptier, but instead, I felt like something had been honored and set free." That's what this part of retirement is really about. Honoring the past, but not being held hostage by it. In Buddhist thought, we are reminded again and again of anicca, impermanence, the nature of all things to arise, exist, and then pass away. That includes joy. That includes the toys we once cherished. It's not a failure to admit that something no longer serves your life. It's a kind of spiritual maturity, an awareness that true freedom doesn't come from what we hold on to, but from what we're willing to set down. So maybe this week, instead of walking past that old kayak or jet ski or dusty craft room, you pause, you ask yourself, not with pressure, but with gentleness, does this still give me life, or is it a beautiful shell that once did? Letting go doesn't mean erasing joy. It means clearing space for new joy to arrive, for someone else to use what you no longer need, for your own heart to feel lighter, more at peace, less entangled. And as we begin to declutter the garage of unused things, it brings us naturally to a deeper level, beyond the things we keep for fun, toward the responsibilities we maintain that perhaps no longer serve. In the next part, we'll explore one of the most overlooked sources of stress in retirement: side businesses and rental properties, once useful, even profitable, but now perhaps more noise than nourishment. Part 5, that side hustle that became a spiritual weight. You didn't start it for the money, at least not only for that. Maybe it was a rental property you inherited, or a small business you built from the ground up, or a consulting gig that grew out of the career you once held with pride. In the beginning, it gave you a sense of purpose, a rhythm, a little extra income, yes, but also the feeling that you were still needed, still relevant, still in motion. But now, Now you wake up to emails about late rent, maintenance issues that can't be ignored, client calls that stretch longer than your patience, paperwork piling up in drawers, and something inside you wonders, not for the first time, am I doing this because I want to, or because I don't know how to stop? Let me tell you a story from the Buddhist tradition, one that speaks not of business but of burden. A young monk once traveled far to meet an old master known for his insight. The master greeted him kindly and said, "Come, walk with me to the river." Along the way, they passed a man carrying a large sack of rice on his shoulders. The man was sweating, his back bent low. The monk asked him why he didn't rest. The man replied, "This sack fed my family for many years. I carried it when times were hard, and it brought us through. I honor it now by keeping it close." The master stopped. "But does it feed you now?" The man was silent. Then slowly, he placed the sack on the ground. He stretched, he breathed, and then he cried, not out of pain, but out of relief. In our lives, we carry many sacks, some heavier than others. Businesses that once fed our spirit, investments that once seemed full of promise, roles that once defined us. But what happens when they stop feeding us and begin to drain us instead? I once spoke with a retired man named Bill who had managed 3 rental properties for over 20 years. He was proud of them, and rightly so. He'd built his retirement plan around those homes. But as the years passed, the joy of ownership faded. Tenants came and went. Repairs never stopped. One winter, after a 2 a.m. plumbing emergency, Bill looked at his wife and said, "I don't want to die holding a wrench." And that was his turning point. He sold the properties, paid off his debt, and moved to a smaller, quieter town. What surprised him most wasn't the financial freedom, it was the mental clarity. "I didn't realize how loud it had gotten in my head," he told me, "until it got quiet." In Buddhist practice, we are taught to examine not only what we own, but what owns us. The Buddha once said, "To carry a burden is suffering, to lay it down, liberation." But why is it so hard to let go of something that once brought us so much meaning? Because often, these ventures aren't just businesses, they're extensions of our identity. The work we've done, the roles we've played, the competence we've proven. To give them up can feel like giving up a piece of ourselves. But here's the quiet truth. Who you are is not what you manage. You are not your duplex. You are not your online store. You are not the late-night emails or the stack of tax documents waiting on your desk. You are more than what you've built. And sometimes the greatest act of wisdom isn't holding on, it's knowing when to walk away. I'm not saying every side business needs to be shut down. For some, it still brings joy, energy, even spiritual vitality. But if it brings you tension, fatigue, anxiety, if it keeps you tethered to a pace of life you no longer want, then maybe, just maybe, it's time to ask the deeper question. Is this venture still serving your peace, or simply feeding your fear of letting go? Because here's the truth. Few people say out loud, retirement is not failure. It's a form of awakening, a chance to reclaim your hours, your thoughts, your breath, a time to trade complexity for simplicity, effort for ease, noise for silence. And just like the man by the river, who finally set his sack down, you may find that the moment you release what no longer feeds you, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you make space for something far more nourishing to enter your life. Maybe it's more time with your grandchildren, or morning walks with no emails waiting, or the deep soul-filling joy of reading by a window with the sunlight pouring in. Whatever it is, you won't know it's waiting until you let something else go. So now we've journeyed through the 5 things many choose to release before retirement. And as you sit with all of this, as you reflect on your home, your car, your finances, your belongings, your work, the real question isn't what you're getting rid of. It's this: what are you finally making room for? And now we return to the quiet question we began with. What do you truly want to carry into this next season of your life? Not the things others say you should keep, not what you feel guilty letting go of, but the few essential things that still bring you peace, presence, and purpose. In these past few moments together, we've gently looked at 5 areas of life that for many become sources of silent heaviness in retirement. A home once full of life, now too large for your needs. A second or third vehicle that represents movement, yet often just sits idle. Financial accounts and investments so complex, they quietly drain your attention. Recreational toys, boats, bikes, jet skis that once brought joy but now gather dust. And finally, side businesses or rental properties that promised income but now cost more in stress than they offer in reward. Each of these carries more than financial weight. They carry emotional weight. They're tied to memories, identities, stages of life you've already lived with fullness. But retirement is not a time to freeze those memories in place. It's a rare, sacred invitation to soften, to reflect, and to choose again with intention. Letting go is not about loss. It is not about erasing your past. It is about honoring what once was, while making space for what wants to emerge now. In the Buddhist path, we learn that non-attachment is not rejection. It is a gentle returning to what is essential, to what still breathes life into your days, to what nourishes your spirit in the present moment. And so I invite you, softly and sincerely, to ask yourself, what am I holding on to out of habit that no longer reflects who I am today? What could I release, not in sorrow, but in gratitude? And in that empty space, what might begin to bloom? You don't need to have all the answers today, but sometimes the act of asking is where the transformation begins. Take your time, be tender with yourself, and remember, this chapter of life is not a retreat. It's a return to what really matters, a return to your center. So as you step into the days ahead, may you carry only what lifts your soul, and may you leave behind all that no longer serves your walk. Letting go is not losing. It is opening your hands to receive something new, perhaps even the peace that's been waiting all along. May your days grow lighter, may your mind grow clearer, and may your path feel gentler as you release what no longer belongs. If this message touched something quiet within you, I hope you'll walk with us again. Please like, share, and subscribe to Quiet Wisdom. Your presence here matters, and this journey is far richer when we take it together. Until next time, be well, be still, and walk gently.